Judy Anderson did not show up for work early in the morning on December 26, 2007. She worked at the post office with her friend Linda. The two women had known each other for many years, got along well, and often visited each other on weekends. Judy was known as a very responsible employee who never missed a shift without a valid reason or prior notice, but this day was clearly different from the rest. Concerned, Linda asked her supervisor for permission to leave and headed to the Anderson family home by 9 a.m. to check if everything was all right. She had no idea that she was walking into a situation of mortal danger. By a stroke of luck, no one was there at the time. Upon arriving at the Andersons' house, Linda noticed that the family's cars were parked outside, but the house itself appeared empty, and the silence was unsettling. When Linda approached the front door, she knocked but got no response. She tried calling, but still, there was no answer. After knocking harder, she realized the door was unlocked, which seemed strange given the house appeared vacant. Upon stepping inside, she was immediately struck by a strange, unpleasant smell. Linda called out for the family members, but no one responded. As she walked through the first floor and passed by the basement, she noticed something suspicious below. Descending into the darkness, she saw a man lying on the floor. At first, she thought he had been poisoned by carbon monoxide and wanted to pull him out to safety. But as she got closer, she noticed the man had been shot in the head. Looking around in the dim light, Linda realized there were more bodies in the basement. Without her mobile phone on hand, Linda frantically called 911 using the family's home phone. She reported finding 3 bodies in the Andersons' home. Police arrived at the property around 9:30 a.m. It quickly became clear that the tragedy was far greater in scope than Linda had imagined. In the basement, officers found Scott, his wife, and their 2 young children. All of them had been shot in the head and carelessly piled together. The bodies of the elder Andersons, Judy and Wayne, were discovered in the barn where they had been hidden by the killers after being brutally executed. The town of Carnation, Washington, was a quiet, peaceful place where crimes were usually limited to the occasional theft. Nothing like this had ever happened until that fateful day when Carnation became the site of one of the most horrifying murders in the state's history, casting a dark shadow over the holiday season. While forensic experts were still processing the scene at around 11 a.m., the Andersons' daughter, Michelle, and her boyfriend, Joseph, arrived and attempted to reach their trailer on the property. Naturally, the police were eager to speak with them. From the very beginning, detectives noticed that the crime scene had already been cordoned off. Something frightening had clearly happened here. The entire area was marked off with caution tape, yet neither Michelle nor Joseph seemed curious about why this was happening on her parents' farm. Why was the police there? They didn't ask any questions about their family members, as if they didn't care at all. All of this, of course, looked suspicious. Given their odd behavior, the 29-year-olds, Michelle and Joseph, were detained and questioned separately at the station. From the start, Michelle acted overly confident and even defiant. She explained that on December 24th, she and Joseph had planned to go to Las Vegas to get married, which is why neither of them was home at the suspected time of the crime. According to her, they had no idea what had happened during this period. However, neither of them wore wedding rings, nor did they have a marriage certificate. Michelle then explained that they had gotten lost on the way and never made it to Las Vegas. Frustrated, they decided to return home, only to find the police there. Joseph, on the other hand, was the weaker link from the start. He appeared extremely nervous and began to crack almost immediately during the interrogation. He was the first to confess to the murder of the family. He seemed genuinely remorseful, crying and calling himself a monster. Michelle broke under pressure a little later and also admitted to killing her family members. The young couple agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Detectives were especially focused on finding the murder weapons. The pair led law enforcement officers to the location where they had hidden 2 guns. After the shooting, they had discarded the evidence into a river near the town. When the couple guided detectives to the exact spot, the dive team was called in to search the water. Thanks to their efforts, the guns were retrieved and sent to the lab. Ballistics testing confirmed that these were indeed the weapons used to execute 6 people who had collectively suffered 14 gunshot wounds. But what exactly had happened to the family and what could have led to such violence? 60-year-old Wayne Andersen was an engineer at Boeing. Born into a loving family, he had spent his childhood years on the farm with his parents. Wayne was active, ambitious, and determined to get a good education and build a successful career. His dreams quickly started coming true. Wayne worked hard while also building his personal life. His first relationship didn't work out, and the couple split up fairly quickly. He was able to build a wonderful family with her, one that they both were rightfully proud of. By 2007, the couple had been married for 31 years and were living peacefully on their farm. Judy Andersen, 61 years old, worked for the Postal Service. From the very beginning, she was focused on family, dreaming of children and a happy marriage. Wayne became her chance to make all of that happen. Their family home was located in the small town of Carnation, not far from Seattle. It was a tight-knit community where people knew the Andersons well. The couple had friendly relationships with everyone around them, regularly gathering with neighbors for holidays and barbecues. Over the course of 30 years of marriage, the Andersons had 3 children, Mary, Scott, and Michelle. Their eldest daughter, Mary, by this time had moved to the nearby town of North Bend. She had left the family home and lived on her own for several years, building her career. However, her personal life was less successful. She had fallen ill around the holidays and planned to visit her parents later when she felt better. At the time of the tragic events, Scott was 32 years old. He had a 30-year-old wife, Erica. Scott dedicated a lot of time to his career, but his personal life was also in good shape. The couple had children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They lived in a nearby town, about a 30-minute drive from Wayne and Judy's house. Scott was a devoted family man, a husband, and a father. He worked as a construction worker, while Erica was a stay-at-home mom taking care of the home and their children. Michelle Andersen, at 29, had always stood out among her siblings, usually not for the best reasons. From a young age, she had earned a reputation as a quarrelsome and difficult child, even in school. She didn't achieve any career successes. Among the neighbors and friends of the Andersen family, it was known that Michelle was the problem member of the family. However, her brother and sister continued to support her. They forgave her challenging nature, and their parents still hoped that Michelle would eventually come to her senses and reveal her talents. Michelle had been in several relationships, but they hadn't worked out. Her most recent boyfriend was 29-year-old Joseph McEnroy. The couple had been together for about 5 years. Their relationship was quite complicated, but Michelle hadn't had a longer-lasting connection with anyone else. Michelle and Joseph met on a dating site and quickly began to build a relationship. Initially, they maintained a long-distance connection, but eventually, the couple moved in together. Their attempt to rent an apartment didn't work out as they lacked specialized education, which led to difficulties with finding work and making ends meet. In 2004, they rented a mobile home. This was the only way Michelle and Joseph could afford rent, at least in the beginning. Neighbors who were familiar with the couple described them as failures and very lazy. They rarely left their trailer, avoided eye contact with people, and shied away from communication. Even brief encounters seemed to make them uncomfortable. The slightest misunderstanding, such as a car being parked incorrectly in front of their trailer, would provoke anger. Michelle would immediately rush out to argue and yell as if she had been waiting for such an opportunity to assert herself. But there were also some more overtly strange behaviors. Several people mentioned seeing Michelle in fits of aggression, where she would lash out without apparent reason, only to calm down abruptly afterward. These episodes were troubling, and some even suggested she seek psychiatric help. Almost every time Michelle encountered strangers, she would bring up the subject of money. Typically, she made up stories about how her family was wealthy, but for some reason, they didn't use their money. Um, in reality, both Michelle and Joseph came across as unpleasant. Many people described them as unkempt, lazy, and unambitious. They often appeared disheveled and wore dirty clothes, which led others to avoid them. In this relationship, Michelle clearly held the dominant position. She controlled Joseph tightly, even answering questions for him. She referred to herself as the black sheep of her family, emphasizing that despite her marginal lifestyle, she was too good for the rest of the Andersons. Naturally, this behavior didn't foster warm relations within the family, and conflicts periodically arose. If Michelle wasn't making up tales about the Andersons' wealth, she would recount how terribly her parents treated her. She loved to paint vivid pictures of how her father had abused her from a young age and how her mother was a hypocritical woman who mentally tormented her. According to Michelle, living with her parents had been unbearable, which is why she had run away from home and started living her own life. Neighbors had repeatedly seen Judy visiting her daughter once a month. Every time, she would bring bags full of groceries, trying to support her daughter. The woman behaved politely, calmly, was friendly, and nothing in her actions suggested the abuse Michelle had mentioned. On the other hand, the girl was rude and could yell at her mother despite her kindness and care. One of the couple's friends described their mobile home as an unpleasant place to survive, not to live. The trailer was in a depressing condition, with very sparse furniture inside, and most of the household appliances were broken. Several windows were shattered and poorly patched up. The residents had used makeshift tinting, covering everything with plastic sheeting that barely let any light in. Michelle admitted that the windows were covered with such plastic on purpose. She didn't want outsiders to see what was going on inside their home. When she was first asked why it was done, she said that the neighbors were spying on them. According to Michelle, the trailer had even been attempted to be broken into a few times when the couple wasn't home. She reported it to the police, but nothing was found, despite several security cameras near their trailer. Neighbors doubted anyone would break into their trailer as there was almost nothing inside and thieves wouldn't find anything valuable. It seemed like Michelle had made everything up to draw attention to herself. Her relationship with Joseph appeared quite strange. Michelle genuinely saw herself as a spiritual guide. According to her words, she was showing the guy how to live properly. Few people believed that. Apparently, her knowledge was lacking, which led to some unpleasant changes. First, Michelle lost her job, and then a similar fate befell Joseph. After a couple of overdue land rent payments, they had to move the trailer. They didn't have money for proper accommodation. The couple was forced to return to the Andersons' farm, where Michelle's parents lived. Michelle and Joseph moved the trailer to the Andersons' farm, where Michelle's parents welcomed and took them in. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2007, the Andersen family planned to have a celebration with their close ones. The parents, 61-year-old Judy and 60-year-old Wayne, decided to gather everyone around. Scott, along with his wife and two young children, headed to the family home. Only the older daughter, Mary, couldn't make it. While everyone was waiting for the guests, Joseph and Michelle stayed in their trailer. Likely, another conflict had occurred, and that's why the parents and daughter with her boyfriend were in a fight. Suddenly, around 4 p.m., they came out of the trailer. Both were armed with pistols. Judy was packing Christmas presents in the backyard, preparing for the arrival of the guests. Joseph started a conversation with Judy while Michelle quietly moved from behind. Wayne, who was sitting inside the house reading a newspaper, noticed what was happening and tried to intervene. Michelle noticed him and took action to stop him, but something went wrong, and then Joseph quickly intervened, which led to an unfortunate incident with Wayne. Judy also found herself in danger. Taking advantage of a brief distraction, the couple quickly cleaned up the scene and moved the bodies to a shed, hiding them from outside eyes. Time was running out, since the family was due to arrive soon. Later, around 5 p.m., Scott, Erica, and their children, Nathan and Olivia, arrived as planned. They were ready to celebrate Christmas, but were surprised when the parents didn't greet them at the door. This was strange because they were used to Judy and Wayne always being excited to see their grandchildren. Michelle tried to reassure the guests, saying that her parents had gone out for errands and would be back soon. The guests entered the house, not noticing the parents' cars still parked outside. There, they were greeted by Joseph. When Scott sat down on the couch, Michelle wasted no time and took a few steps to eliminate the threat, but his actions turned out to be fatal. Erica tried to escape with the children, but the couple didn't back down. When they ran out of ammunition, Erica managed to hide in a room, grabbing the phone. She dialed the emergency service, but unfortunately, she didn't have a chance to speak as Joseph burst into the room, and the phone was destroyed at the moment she was trying to report the situation. All of this happened in front of the children, who were terrified by what was unfolding. Olivia, unfortunately, also became a victim, and despite all attempts to protect her, Nathan, still very young, didn't understand what was going on until he was caught up in the tragic events. Erica, despite her last efforts, was unable to alert the emergency services. All that remained after that were the memories of that terrible night. A patrol was sent for verification. Soon, a law enforcement vehicle arrived at the Andersons' house. They were greeted by Michelle, who demonstratively locked the gates right in front of the officers' noses. She reluctantly interacted with the patrol, told them everything was fine, and refused to let them inside. They were unable to gain access to the house. As a result, the police had to leave. Trying to justify her bloody actions, Michelle explained that she was angry at her parents and brother. Scott, according to her, owed her a large sum of money and refused to pay it back. This stemmed from the fact that over the years, she had repeatedly lent her brother $3,000 to $5,000. Eventually, debt accumulated to $40,000. She tried to resolve the issue with him amicably, but Scott stubbornly ignored her demands for repayment. When Michelle turned to her parents for support in the dispute, they simply ignored her. Because of this, she harbored resentment. In addition, Michelle claimed that for many years she had been subjected to physical and emotional abuse by her father, and shortly before the murder, her mother began pressuring her to pay rent. Michelle was outraged, as she had no intention of paying her parents for the space her trailer occupied on their farm. However, no one believed the girl's words. All the couple's acquaintances knew that Joseph and Michelle didn't have money to lend $3,000 to $5,000 to a brother who was doing well financially and didn't need loans. The existence of a $40,000 debt seemed highly questionable. Furthermore, no one believed that the parents, aware of the couple's financial troubles, would demand rent from them. The Anderson family was known to be very hospitable, having warmly taken in Michelle and her boyfriend, helping them with groceries, and never asking for money in return. Feeling that no one believed her, 29-year-old Michelle abruptly began changing her statements. Each time, the criminal tried to portray herself as the victim. The final version of the motive for shooting 6 people was that she was envious of her brother's success, his family life, and his work situation. She envied her parents. This still did not explain the murder of the young children, who barely understood what was happening and were innocent of the fact that the couple was so lazy. According to Michelle, it was an act of mercy on her part. She realized that her nieces and nephews would grow up in a cruel world where both parents would be taken away from them at a young age, and she didn't want such a life for the little ones. Moreover, she was irritated by the children's crying as they witnessed the shooting of their parents. In interviews, Michelle eagerly talked about how she had been oppressed by her parents, constantly inventing new stories, each more colorful than the last. Even the criminal's confession on tape took over 2 hours, as they thoroughly and in detail described who shot whom and in what order. On December 28, 2007, Michelle Andersen and Joseph McEnroe were charged with 6 counts of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. Despite the confession, the trial was long. 10 months later, in October 2008, the county prosecutor decided to seek the death penalty for both criminals, which was still in effect in the state at the time. Given the cold-blooded massacre of both adults and young children, it seemed the jury would inevitably support the death penalty for both, but the governor of Washington state opposed it. In pursuit of sensational statements and public attention, Michelle, in another interview, expressed her wish to be executed, as she was suffering terribly and considered the remainder of her days behind bars a far harsher punishment than a lethal injection. Despite her wish, the death penalty was not considered for the pair. After the hearings, both criminals were sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. After the change in the governor's office, the issue of the death penalty for the pair was revisited. On September 5th, 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned the court's decision. A new trial was now set. Michelle was so scared that she immediately retracted all her previous statements regarding her desire for the death penalty. In January 2015, Joseph McEnroe stood trial. His defense claimed that Michelle had coerced him into committing the crime. According to them, the manipulator had systematically brainwashed him and turned him against his own family. Furthermore, he referred to a mental illness he had suffered from, which made him susceptible to the cunning criminal's influence. Joseph's aunt confirmed these claims, describing the young man's childhood as quite harsh. He was a victim of abuse by his own mother. In his closing statement, Joseph said that at least he killed his victims quickly, so they wouldn't suffer. Notably, he justified the murder of the children in the same way, calling it a form of mercy. On March 25, 2015, the jury found Joseph guilty of the charges brought against him. At sentencing, the defendant still portrayed himself as the victim of manipulation. He even changed his behavior, which the prosecutor pointed out, warning that he was attempting to manipulate the jury's decision by altering his behavior and even his speech. The jurors were unable to come to a unanimous decision regarding the death penalty, so Joseph was again sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 8 years after the tragedy, in January 2016, Michelle Andersen appeared in court once more. The prosecution once again decided not to pursue the death penalty. This was due to the fact that Joseph had already been sentenced to life in prison. According to state law, there needed to be equal justice for criminals with the same degree of guilt, which included Joseph and his girlfriend Michelle. It was decided that it would be unjust to seek the death penalty for her. Upon hearing this decision, Michelle cried and told the court that she deeply regretted her actions, wishing she could undo the horrific crime. The prosecutor insisted that the only reason for such emotional outbursts was that she didn't want to spend the rest of her life behind bars and hoped for an even lighter punishment. She had mentioned financial motives or anything related to money more than 35 times when attempting to explain the reason for her insane actions. It seemed that the main motive for the crime was money, inheritance, and her parents' house, which she intended to inherit. Deep down, Michelle remained the same cruel and bloodthirsty person. In any case, according to the prosecutor, no one should trust a woman who had repeatedly changed her statements and outright lied. For example, when she accused her family of abuse. During the investigation and witness testimonies, no evidence was found to support that such incidents had occurred in her life. Michelle was blatantly trying to discredit her relatives, as if the murder itself wasn't enough, and all of this was just to make herself appear in a better light. New explanations also emerged. For instance, Michelle insisted that she hated Erica, just as she hated the others, but her negative feelings toward Erica were caused by the sense that Erica had taken her brother away from her life. However, their relationship had been strained, which meant the killer was lying again. Ultimately, the likely reason for the massacre of the young woman was simple jealousy. During the trial, the jury heard the testimony of 38 witnesses called by the prosecution. In many ways, this was a repeat of the trial of her boyfriend, who by that time was already serving his sentence. The hearings were more of a formality. Among those who spoke was Michelle's older sister, Mary, who had miraculously not been able to attend that holiday gathering. Judy and Wayne were gathering the whole family for Christmas, but Mary had fallen ill just before. Later, she thanked fate for not being able to go due to her health condition. In court, she suggested that this had saved her life. Michelle confessed that she had been planning the crime against her family for about 2 weeks. However, the killers clearly weren't very clever, as they failed to cover their tracks, dispose of the bodies, or remove any evidence of the crime. The natural story of a wedding in Las Vegas as an alibi turned out to be a lie and was immediately disproven. Despite the tearful confessions, Michelle showed her true face when it became clear that her sentence would stand. There was no talk of parole. In a fit of hysteria, she began shouting at the judge, threatening to file lawsuits for providing her with bad lawyers. The defendant even wrote demands to be released from prison and allowed to find her own private attorney, followed by accusations of violating her constitutional rights, and the judge became the target of her anger. At present, both criminals are in state prisons. This was not only an emotional and lengthy process, but also an expensive one. Given the numerous appeals and the resistance from the killer's defense teams, the fight to reduce the sentence dragged on for years. Even without considering the funds spent directly on the investigation, which was carried out by the sheriff's office, or the forensic examinations conducted by the state crime lab, the prosecution spent around $2 million on the case for both criminals. Joseph's defense cost around $5 million, and Michelle's was even more expensive. The only consolation for the people who effectively paid for the work of the law enforcement system in this case was the fact that these bloodthirsty monsters would never be free again. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all, and goodbye.